We often think of truth as something we owe to others. We imagine difficult conversations, uncomfortable confessions, or moments where we finally come clean. But before any of that happens, before a word leaves our mouth, truth begins in a quieter, more private place within ourselves. That kind of truth is messy. It's the kind you don't post about. It's the kind that wakes you up at night, sits heavily on your chest, and asks, are you living in alignment with who you really are? It's deceptively simple to avoid that internal honesty. We distract ourselves. We stay busy. We over-answer, over-promise, over-commit. We say we're fine when we're not. We pretend we don't want things we deeply long for. We convince ourselves that discomfort is just the price of stability. But the body keeps score. The soul keeps score. There's a cost to not telling the truth, even if that truth is only whispered in your own heart. Here's what that looks like in real life. It looks like staying in a relationship where you feel lonely, but telling yourself it's not that bad. It looks like staying quiet in meetings, even when you know your input matters, because somewhere inside you've learned to believe your voice is too much or not enough. It looks like burnout masked as productivity, people-pleasing disguised as kindness, fear showing up in the costume of control. When we don't tell ourselves the truth, we lose access to our own power, because the truth, your truth, is not weakness. It's the clearest signal you have about who you are and what matters most to you. It's your compass, but it takes courage to listen. It takes intention to sit still and ask, what am I avoiding? Where am I pretending? What part of me have I silenced to keep the peace? It's not about self-blame. This isn't an invitation to shame yourself. This is an invitation to come home to yourself, to be honest, even if that honesty scares you, especially if it scares you. Because when you can look yourself in the mirror and say, this is where I'm at right now, you begin to reclaim your wholeness. You stop splitting yourself into the version you show the world and the version you live with when the lights go off. You become more congruent, more grounded, and more free. The truth doesn't always feel good at first, but it always points us toward freedom. And that journey, the one where we face our truth before we try to fix the world or manage others, is the bravest one we'll ever take. Telling the truth isn't just about accuracy, it's about emotional exposure. It's about being willing to stand in front of someone, or even in front of yourself, and say something real without knowing how it will be received, without a guarantee that it will be understood, accepted, or reciprocated. That's what makes truth so powerful and also so terrifying. Because underneath every truth is a risk. And underneath every risk is vulnerability. We grow up learning to protect ourselves. Some of us learned early on that saying what we really feel might be punished or ignored or ridiculed. Others were told, implicitly or explicitly, that being strong meant keeping it together, not letting your guard down, not needing too much. So we build armor. We get good at saying the right things, doing what's expected, keeping peace at the expense of our own peace. We become experts at managing appearances and strangers to our own truth. But the truth doesn't live behind armor. It lives in the cracks. It lives in the conversations we're scared to have, in the words we swallow, in the things we don't post. Truth is found in the Me Too moments, in the trembling confessions, in the times we speak up even though our voice shakes. And to access those moments, we have to be vulnerable. Vulnerability gets a bad rap. It's often seen as weakness, as fragility, as something to avoid. But real vulnerability isn't about oversharing or putting everything out there without boundaries. It's about being honest when it matters most. It's saying, I don't know, when you're supposed to have answers. It's saying, I need help when the world rewards self-sufficiency. It's saying, that hurt me, when your instinct is to brush it off. That's not weakness. That's strength wrapped in humility. There's no truth without vulnerability because truth is inherently uncertain. We don't get to control how others react to our honesty. We can't dictate whether they'll meet us with compassion or criticism, with open arms or closed minds. That's the gamble. And that's why so many people stay silent, not because they don't know the truth, but because they're terrified of what the truth might cost them. A relationship, a job, a sense of belonging. But the cost of silence is high too. When we withhold what's true, we disconnect from others and from ourselves. We start living behind a mask, performing roles, saying yes when we mean no, laughing when we want to cry. And little by little, we become strangers to ourselves. We lose the deep, sustaining connection that only comes from being fully seen. When you live vulnerably, you choose to risk being seen. Not the polished version, not the curated image, but the real, flawed, honest version of you. And yes, there will be moments of discomfort, moments when it backfires, moments when you wish you could take it all back. But there will also be moments of deep relief, of exhale, of knowing that you didn't hide, that you told the truth, that you showed up with integrity, even if it wasn't perfect. Vulnerability doesn't mean oversharing with everyone. It means choosing the people who've earned the right to hear your story and offering them the truth. Not for attention, not for validation, but because living in truth is how we stay grounded in who we are. It's in those vulnerable moments where the outcome is uncertain, but the truth is clear, that real connection is born. That's where trust is built. That's where courage grows. And that's where healing happens. Telling the truth doesn't always feel like a moment of clarity. Sometimes it feels like an earthquake. It shakes the foundation you've been standing on. It shifts relationships. It stirs up dust in places you've been trying hard not to look. And the first thing we often feel when truth shows up isn't relief, it's fear, chaos, disruption. That's the part people don't talk about enough. We romanticize truth, make it sound like it's always empowering and liberating, and it can be, but often not right away, because truth, real truth, has a way of dismantling things. It doesn't knock politely, it breaks down doors, it exposes what's been buried, it forces us to confront the very things we've been carefully managing, denying, or pretending don't exist. You tell the truth about your burnout, and suddenly you realize your pace has never been sustainable. You tell the truth about feeling unloved in your marriage, and now you can't go back to pretending. You tell the truth about a dream you've had for years, and it shines a light on how small you've been living. Truth doesn't leave things untouched. It doesn't leave you untouched. And yet, as uncomfortable as that disruption is, it's the only way to move forward, because the alternative is stagnation. The alternative is pretending. The alternative is living a version of your life that is safe on the outside and hollow on the inside. There's a strange grief that comes with speaking the truth. Sometimes the grief is for the illusion you have to let go of. Sometimes it's for the version of you that worked so hard to keep it all together. And sometimes the grief is for what could have been if the truth had been welcomed earlier or heard fully or held with compassion. But that grief is necessary. It's sacred. It means you're no longer willing to lie to yourself to stay comfortable. It means you're choosing to move toward what's real. And here's the part we forget when we're in the messy middle. Disruption is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of the healing. It's the rupture that creates room for repair. It's the crack that lets light in. We think the truth will destroy things, and sometimes it does, but only the things that weren't built to last. What remains after the dust settles is something far more resilient, something grounded in reality, not performance, something trustworthy. Healing doesn't happen in denial. It doesn't happen in pretending everything is okay. Healing happens when we tell the truth about where it hurts, about what we need, about what isn't working. And sometimes that truth doesn't make things better immediately. It makes them more real. But real is what we need if we ever want to feel whole. I've sat across from people who have spoken the truth after years of silence, and you can see the shift in their bodies. Their shoulders drop, their breath deepens. Even when their eyes are filled with tears, even when they know things might fall apart, there is something sacred about that moment because they are no longer carrying the weight of the unspoken. And that alone is healing. It doesn't mean it's easy. The path after telling the truth can be painful. It can involve endings. It can involve loneliness, discomfort, change. But it's also the only path to freedom, and it's the only path that honors who we really are. We were never meant to live under layers of performance. We were never meant to carry the weight of pretending. The disruption truth causes is not a punishment, it's a clearing. And in that space, even in the mess of it, even when it feels like progress, you're already beginning to heal. Because the moment you tell the truth, even if no one else is ready to hear it, you've taken your first breath outside the lie. And that breath, that's where healing begins. There's a way to tell the truth that leaves people more whole than when you found them. And there's a way to tell the truth that cuts like a knife. We often hear that being honest is the highest virtue. I'm just being real, people say. I'm just telling it like it is. But the truth, when delivered without compassion, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a weapon. Compassion doesn't weaken the truth, it humanizes it. It reminds us that the people we're speaking to have stories, histories, nervous systems. They carry unseen battles, fragile hopes, quiet fears. And if we forget that, we risk turning truth into something sharp and punishing, rather than something clarifying and connective. There's a difference between truth-telling and truth-dumping. One is rooted in courage, the other in ego. One creates the possibility for growth, the other creates defensiveness, shame, and sometimes emotional damage. The same truth can be spoken two ways. One that says, I want to move closer to you, and we need to talk about something real, and another that says, you need to know how wrong you are. One builds bridges, the other burns them. Telling the truth with compassion means we take responsibility, not just for what we say, but for how we say it. It means we're not just trying to be right, we're trying to be kind. And kindness doesn't mean avoiding hard conversations. It means showing up with clarity and care. It means saying, this matters enough to talk about, and you matter enough for me to speak with tenderness. Sometimes we avoid telling the truth because we're afraid of hurting someone. That's understandable. But compassion doesn't ask us to lie or sugarcoat. It asks us to speak from a place of empathy, not judgment. It asks us to pause before we speak, to get grounded, to check our motives. Am I saying this to feel superior, to vent my frustration? Or am I saying it because I believe something real can come from it? And on the flip side, sometimes people say hurtful things under the guise of honesty when what they're really doing is outsourcing their discomfort. They say what they want, how they want, and expect others to just deal with it. But emotional maturity means being able to hold tension. It means recognizing that timing matters, tone matters, delivery matters. The truth doesn't have to be loud to be heard. It doesn't have to be harsh to be clear. Truth-telling is sacred work. It requires integrity, yes, but also humility, especially when we're holding someone else's heart in our hands. Because sometimes the truth we need to say is about impact, sometimes it's about hurt, sometimes it's about needing space, setting a boundary, saying no. And if we forget to bring compassion into that, we risk making people feel discarded, shamed, or attacked. even if we didn't mean to. So how many of us are willing to, compassion doesn't make the truth less honest, it makes it more digestible. It invites people into the conversation instead of shutting them out. It allows room for complexity, nuance, and grace, and it makes it far more likely that the truth will be heard, not just received defensively, but truly heard. It also makes it more likely that we'll be heard when it's our turn. Because when you lead with compassion, people remember how it felt. They remember that you didn't use your truth to wound them. They remember that you saw them as human. And that creates safety, even in difficult moments. Telling the truth is an act of courage. Doing it with compassion is an act of love. And love, the grounded, honest, no-nonsense kind, is what makes truth sustainable. It's what makes truth not just something we survive, but something we grow from. Living in truth isn't just about what you say, it's about how you live. It's about the invisible lines you draw, the choices you make, and the energy you protect. One of the most powerful and often painful consequences of telling the truth is this: it reorders your life. It reorders your priorities, your relationships, your expectations. And with that reordering comes the need for boundaries. For a lot of us, boundaries were never modeled. We grew up in homes where being nice mattered more than being honest. We learned to avoid conflict, to make other people comfortable, to say yes even when every part of us was screaming no. We learned to put our needs last and call it love. But here's the truth: most of us have to unlearn in adulthood. Without boundaries, your truth will never have room to breathe. There comes a point when you realize that living in truth means disappointing people. It means saying no. It means telling someone that doesn't work for me anymore. And maybe they're confused, maybe they're hurt, maybe they try to guilt you back into your old patterns. And still you have to hold the line, not because you don't care, but because you care deeply about staying true to yourself. Boundaries aren't walls, they're clarity. They're the way we teach others how to treat us, and more importantly, they're how we protect our energy, our time, and our emotional integrity. If you are constantly overextending yourself, constantly saying yes when you mean no, constantly giving pieces of yourself away, you are not living in your truth. You are living in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being seen as selfish, fear of losing love. But the truth is, love that requires you to abandon yourself isn't love. Belonging that demands you betray your own needs isn't belonging. When you start to live honestly with yourself first, you start to see the places in your life where you've been shrinking, tolerating, appeasing. And from that awareness comes change. Sometimes living in truth means walking away from roles you've outgrown. It means leaving the version of yourself that was always agreeable, always pleasing, always putting others first. And yes, there's grief in that, but there's also relief. Because when you begin to set boundaries, you're no longer performing. You're no longer managing other people's reactions to stay safe. You're no longer shape-shifting to avoid discomfort. Just being honest. And honesty over time brings peace. People won't always like your boundaries. That's okay. Boundaries are not for them, they're for you. They're how you stay rooted in what's real. They're how you make space for the relationships that can hold your truth, not just your compliance. They're how you make peace with the fact that being misunderstood is not the worst thing that can happen. Abandoning yourself is. The hardest part is the beginning. The first time you say no. The first time you cancel a plan you don't want to attend without over-explaining. The first time you say, I need time, or that doesn't feel good, or this is what I'm available for, your voice might shake. You might second guess yourself, but every time you honor your boundary, you build self-trust. You begin to believe, not just intellectually, but viscerally, that your needs matter too. The biggest of you is worth viscerally. That's the only place it doesn't. But you need to build self-trust. Boundaries are a love language, not just to others, but to yourself. They say, I am worth protecting. I am worth honoring. My truth matters enough for me to protect the space it needs to exist. And when you live that way, aligned with your truth, guided by your boundaries, you stop asking permission to be yourself. You stop outsourcing your worth. You stop looking for someone else to validate your needs. You start showing up whole. Living in truth may cost you some comfort, some approval, even some relationships, but it will give you your life back. And that, in the end, is everything. Trust isn't built in grand gestures. It's not built in crisis or performance or declarations of loyalty. Trust is built in the small moments. It's built in the daily, quiet, ordinary choices to tell the truth, especially when it would be easier not to. There's a kind of intimacy that can only grow in the presence of truth, not the polished kind, not the version we offer when we're trying to maintain a perfect image, but the kind of truth that says, this is where I really am. The kind that reveals, not hides. The kind that lets someone see behind the curtain. That's where trust lives, in the tension between uncertainty and transparency. We don't trust people who are always agreeable. We trust people who are honest. People who are willing to say the thing no one else will say. People who are consistent in what they show and say. People who risk being uncomfortable rather than being untrue. It's not about always being right. It's about being real. That's what people remember. That's what makes them feel safe. Because safety doesn't come from perfection. It comes from predictability, from alignment, from knowing that what you say matches how you live. And when someone experiences that kind of congruence over time, they begin to believe you. They begin to let their own guard down because they've seen enough of your truth to know that you're not just performing connection, you're cultivating it. The hard part is building trust through truth often requires slowing down. It asks us to pause before we rush to smooth things over. It asks us to say the uncomfortable thing now rather than letting it build into resentment later. And sometimes it asks us to own things we'd rather avoid, the mistake, the hurt, the miscue, the broken promise. But trust isn't built in our avoidance. It's built in our repair. We trust people who can say, I was wrong, and mean it. People who can say, I don't know, without shame. People who don't shift blame when things get messy, but who stay present, who stay accountable, who tell the truth even when it costs them something. Because if someone will be honest when the stakes are high, you can believe them when the stakes are low. And that's where safety grows. We also build trust with ourselves when we tell the truth. Every time we honor what we feel, what we believe, what we need, we reinforce our own internal stability. And when we break that, when we betray our own truth to please others, to fit in, to avoid discomfort, we chip away at our own self-trust. We start to question ourselves, to hesitate, to lose clarity about what we want and where we stand. Telling the truth then becomes not just a relational act, but a foundational one. And the more we practice truth in small ways, naming our limits, clarifying our expectations, admitting when we're hurt, the more natural it becomes. The truth starts to feel less like a performance and more like a posture. We don't have to scramble to remember what we said or worry about being found out. We can simply be. And in that kind of presence, people relax, they soften, they start to tell the truth too. Because honesty invites honesty. Authenticity breeds authenticity. Trust isn't just about being believed, it's about being known, really known. And being known requires us to stop hiding. It requires us to show up fully, even when it's awkward or vulnerable or incomplete. That's the paradox of truth. The more of it we offer, the more connection we make, even when it's messy, even when it's not resolved. Because the act of telling the truth says, I respect you enough to be real with you. I care enough to let you see me. I trust you with my truth, and I hope over time you'll trust me with yours. That's how it works. One honest conversation at a time, one boundary at a time, one brave moment at a time. Truth doesn't just build trust, it becomes the soil trust grows in. Absolutely. Here's a suitable ending for this speech. Grounded, reflective, and emotionally resonant, staying fully in the style of Brené Brown. It brings together the heart of the message without being overly polished or prescriptive. It ends not with a command, but with an invitation.